G'day everyone, welcome back to True Eagle. I had no intention of making a True Eagle video today, and then sure enough, an episode of Gettable comes out, and Toomey and Beveridge kind of summarise pretty much every trade rumour that's in this space at the moment, and obviously there's a number of talking points for the West Coast Eagles, so we might as well just sort of respond to some things that were discussed in that, some updates on players, and a new face, a new name linked to the West Coast Eagles that was not previously linked. So we're just going to go through the stories as they come. So I've kind of ordered it in players that are within West Coast right now who may leave, and then at the end we'll talk about the targets that could potentially join the West Coast Eagles. And we've got some updates on existing players as well. So let's start with Tom Barrass. I think I addressed this literally in yesterday's video. No real update other than the fact that he has been reported he's agreed to terms, basically. They said he's set to join Hawthorn, which implies he's agreed on the prospect of joining them. Perhaps there's also some agreement around numbers and what that contract looks like. It does say a 4-year deal. It was reported as 5 years originally. Ryan Daniels amended that to 4 years without a trigger. And then on Gettable, they did say 4-year deal with a potential trigger for a 5th. So I don't really know exactly where that sits. And to be honest, it doesn't really impact us. I suppose on the one hand, though, the longer the contract, the more negotiating power we'd have to say, okay, well, if you're giving him a 5-year deal on whatever money, then he's probably worth 2 first rounders or something like that. But either way, we don't need to get too bogged down on that. We can probably embrace the likelihood he is going to join Hawthorn. So we'll move on to Harry Edwards, who in the background of all this, it's interesting the movement on Harry Edwards. Since he sort of came back into the side and started playing good footy, he went from being a possible Delist D candidate because he just kept getting injured. He came into the side to play some good footy. I've always thought he had AFL potential, so I'm glad. I was always probably leaning towards signing him up at least on a 1-year deal because we need key position defenders who are behind Barrass and McGovern. And thankfully, he put in some reasonable form this year before getting concussed. May or may not return against Carlton, we'll see. Obviously, with the prospect of Barrass leaving the club, key position stocks are important to keep in check. So Harry Edwards leaving would have been a disaster. However, as I sat down to write this, it's been reported he's actually agreed to a 3-year deal to stay at West Coast. So good for him. He went from being unsure if he's going to get a contract next year to getting a 3-year deal. And I think there is obviously a little bit of risk with this because his body hasn't held up, but I think for the position we're in, our list needs at the moment, list balance, and the fact that he's shown improvement this year, this is a little win that I'll absolutely take. And again, it's probably a factor that Barrass is leaving. Harry Edwards had some interest from over east. I believe that was true at the end of last year as well. Sydney, I think, was sniffing around. I remember reading that rumour at least. The demand for key position players, particularly key position defenders and rucks, there's always a bit of a merry-go-round at the end of seasons. So Harry Edwards, there was always going to be a little bit of interest for him, and thankfully we've got him to put pen to paper and commit to the Eagles. And so Barrass leaving obviously gets him a little bit more game time. If Barrass didn't leave, you could make the argument Harry Edwards might have been more tempted by offers overseas. Overseas? Yeah, he's going to go play for Guatemala next season. All right, let's talk about Jack Darling. There was a little bit of a note on him on Gettable. So it says Jack Darling would be open to looking elsewhere if there are other options for him despite being contracted for 2025. So there's 2 avenues to Jack Darling not being on our list next year. We delist him, pay him out, force him to retire at 298 games, or we trade him. And then there's obviously option C, which I think is still the most likely. He stays on the list and plays next year. So again, this is an awkward one for us because while I don't think Darling has been an absolutely horrid, I just don't know if there's much room for him in the team. He did play well against Gold Coast, but he's kind of just holding space at the moment and being an on-field leader, but I think we have enough on-field leaders at the moment where Jack Darling is expendable, and we're in this awkward situation where he's right on the brink of 300 games. I think he'll finish like 297, 298 by the end of this season. So it's a real awkward one. I'm kind of hoping potentially there's a club over east. You'd be looking at Richmond, potentially North Melbourne. I don't know if the Demons would bother with a 32, turning 33-year-old Jack Darling next year. It's also, what kind of offer is he going to get to go overseas? Why do I keep doing that? I don't know what kind of offer he'd get to go over east. You'd think he wouldn't move for less than 2 years. So we'll see what happens there. I'm going to bet that he is likely going to stay. I don't know how big the market would be for a Jack Darling. So that's an interesting one. And also Liam Ryan is described as being more likely to stay at West Coast beyond this year. So he signed a 2-year extension this year. And it was reported, I think, by Tom Morris, who said he might be gettable if clubs offer a 3-year contract in front of him, which is obviously more than the 2 he's getting at West Coast. And my math, Liam Ryan is 28. I think he's born in 1996, so that contract takes him to 30. Potentially would be open to a 3rd year, taking him to 31, which makes sense. These players are considering their futures, etc. So more than likely to stay at West Coast. I'm fine with that. I don't know if I can really articulate in words why I'm okay with Barrass leaving and not Ryan. It probably comes down to what we can get back. And I don't know exactly what clubs would be offering in exchange for Liam Ryan. You know, Tom Barrass could get us pick 11 or 12 and hopefully something else, something better than that. Liam Ryan on his own, I'm not too sure whether we would get the same compensation, and therefore it probably sits for me that I'd rather keep him. And I think, he had something pretty unique in this team with his speed and skills, etc. And I think could be an important piece of us, becoming competitive again in the next few years, even if he won't be there for the next premiership. So those are the players linked out at the moment. We can probably bet on Barrass leaving. Darling is iffy. Liam Ryan more likely to stay, which I don't think... I never really sort of got my head around the prospect that he was actually going to leave, but more just hypothesized about what that would look like. So let's talk about players that are linked to come in and join West Coast. So one of them is Tom Cleary. This is not the first time this has been reported, but Tom Cleary is a key position defender that has been sort of rotting away, I think, in the reserves at Port Adelaide. 30 years old, key position defender. The logic here being, if we lose Barrass, we're going to need someone experienced behind McGovern. So we don't want to go into next year, perhaps, I'm thinking what West Coast are thinking, with McGovern, Harry Edwards, and then presumably Bazzo and Jamison. Bazzo and Jamison have barely got on the park lately. Harry Edwards is also fragile. So I'd imagine it's, just reinforcing depth, and we can call on Tom Cleary. And I think that makes sense, but it's an iffy one because it's a whole list spot to give up. And I think these are going to be valuable for us, making sure we have enough picks, and then also considering the other players linked to us. How are we going to get this all done? We're not going to get all of it done. So Tom Cleary, maybe if, say Jack Darling joins another club, or Liam Ryan or whatever, maybe we make that work. But I don't think it's a massive priority if we just go in with the 4 key defenders next year. I'd rather have the 4 that I mentioned and draft one and have 5 and 1 developing. I'd probably be more comfortable with that. But either way, I'm okay with it, provided we make some room on the list some other way. The other one is James Peatling. This is a brand new one from GWS. Now, I'm aware of Peatling, and I do remember having games where I watched him and go, geez, he's courageous, or he's good. And he is quite an underrated player. Nonetheless, you look at his stats for this year, and he's played 41 games across 4 seasons, so been a fringe player, and was taken actually in the mid-season draft in 2021. In his most recent game, he polled 10 coaches' votes and had a pretty good game against the Brisbane Lions. Only 20 disposals, but 9 clearances. So a clearance winner. He's got good tackle numbers. I think if you look at his stats this year, he's averaging 14 disposals a game. I'll just double check that. But I had a look, and he's subbed off 7 times this season. That does skew your average, but he's had games where he's tackled in the double digits 3 times, and in the last 4 weeks, he started and played a full game and had 6, 8, 4, and 9 clearances, and 7, 11, 10, and 6 tackles. So you can see what he would bring to this young midfield and potentially get a bit more opportunity. So I like that we're, sniffing around undervalued players at other clubs. It does sound like other clubs are interested in as well, and I'll just double check where he was drafted from. He was drafted from Victoria, presumably. It says Origin GWS Giants. I actually don't know what that means. Just looking on Wikipedia, it says he was drafted from the Giants Academy, which implies that he's from New South Wales. Okay, so he's a local, not Victorian. I suppose that probably works in our favour. There's no pull necessarily to go home to Victoria, but nonetheless, West Coast is probably coming from a fair way back in terms of trying to beat out other offers, unless we overpay for him. And we'll see what happens. But Peatling is probably one of the few fringe players that I think, I'd actually really be interested in that, which leads to the next one in Jack Caroll. So Jack Caroll has also continually been linked to West Coast. It does seem increasingly like he might actually get delisted at Carlton because he can't break into that team. It's not because he's no good, it's just that Carlton's midfield, even with their injuries at the moment, their midfield, aside from Chera, there's still a few players to beat out for that position. So he might get delisted. West Coast is interested in him, presumably, obviously, to build a bit of midfield depth that has some AFL experience and a bit of physical maturity. I think he's been played out of position at Carlton, probably a bit more of an inside mid from what I can tell. I'm not really too sure what his prospects are of becoming a good AFL player, but nonetheless, I'll just pass that on as maybe someone we get as a delisted free agent come the end of the season. I don't think it would cost much in a trade. And, after going for Devon Robertson last year and going for James Peatling is another example, Riley Garcia, we're obviously trying to find someone like that. I just don't know how many of those we'll get. So I'd prefer Peatling, but Caroll is one to watch in the back burner there. Bit of an update on Jack Graham. So Ryan Daniels suggested it was pretty much set, and I do trust his judgment, but it doesn't mean that he's right. Like, he might have gotten an indication from West Coast that they're confident. I don't know. I'm speculating here. However, it's been reported in a couple of different places, but most recently on Gettable, that he's still well and truly weighing up a decision to stay at Richmond. He's got a 4-year deal at West Coast. It's unclear what the deal is at Richmond, but he's still weighing it up. And frankly, I do kind of hope we miss out on him. It's not that he's no good and he won't be best 22, but I've made this point before. I just think that, if he's going to play a combination of forward and midfielder, I feel like we've drafted and recruited a number of players for this position as well, in addition to having veterans like Jamie Cripps, Liam Ryan in the team. All Jack Graham would be doing, sure, he would add some good attributes, probably a good leader as well, tackler, defensively minded player, sure. But in the short term, he's just going to push out another young guy from our best 22, and it won't really resemble a rebuilding team if we keep doing stuff like that. So I'm iffy on Jack Graham. We'll see what happens. Again, I was wrong about Jaden Hunt, so we'll see. A couple points on Tim English. Like I said in yesterday's video, no real update, but it does seem increasingly likely we've missed out on him. And Liam Baker is still weighing up between West Coast and Fremantle, so we'll see what happens there. Again, I'm pretty 50-50 on Baker. Like, I think I'd give up pick 23 for him, and I'd probably be okay with that. But that probably does seem a little bit light. I think Richmond want a little bit more than that, and that's where it gets iffy for me. So we'll see what happens there. In other news, we got Luke Edwards. It's been reported by Paddy Sweeney, I believe, is considering retiring because of his third concussion this season. He's still got concussion symptoms sometime after the fact. So they've ruled him out for the season, that's for sure. I do kind of think that Luke Edwards is probably not going to get a new contract anyway. So this always might have been the end of his AFL career, but just passing on the information that he may retire, which is awful because, obviously that implies ongoing health issues, and hopefully he's okay. This is a growing problem for the AFL, and it's become a thing for West Coast in particular as well. We've had multiple retirees from concussion in Venables and Shepherd, and I really hope Luke Edwards is okay, but probably played his last game for West Coast. And in other news, Ash Hanson's pulled out of the coaching race. I did say if Ash Hanson pulled out, I'd be concerned. Like I said, because I've shifted my preference a little bit to Schofield in recent times, not too disappointed by that. I'm a little surprised. He's just basically said family reasons. No idea if that's a cover story or what, but it appears that not many people are clamouring for this West Coast position, and it may be for the benefit of Jared Schofield. So we'll see it happens. Again, a lot to play it out in that sense, and this video is more around our trade and draft stuff. So that's a little update on what's happened, guys. Let me know in the comments what you think, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.